So, taking offense is something we've all done at some point in our lives. At some point, someone's probably said something to you that's felt demeaning or maybe even insulting, regardless of whether or not it was intended to be a joke or not. And just think, how many of you roast your friends? Personally, I do all the time. And not with any malicious intent, right? I'm not trying to emotionally scar someone or leave them with some deep-seated trauma. It's all good-natured and lighthearted. And I'd say that's a pretty common occurrence here in DBHS. You know, just walking around at lunch, you can probably hear some kid calling their friend a clown or some other similar insult. Obviously, though, it's not always fun and games, and sometimes people get genuinely sad or mad because of what someone says. One study by the National Center for Biotechnology Information basically analyzes some of these issues. And from feeling these negative perceptions, it could basically lead to a decrease in self-confidence and self-esteem, which could subsequently lead to a decrease in performance for daily activities. So for us, that could be academics, sports, or maybe some other extracurricular you're a part of. So maybe you don't do as well as you want to for that big test, or you're stuck in a slump for whatever sport you play. Essentially, experiencing these negative emotions will lead to unwanted outcomes in your daily lives. Another organization, the American Psychological Association, says that positive emotions can lead to healthy perceptions, beliefs, and physical well-being. By the same token, negative emotional states can actually negatively impact your physical state. Did you know that just from having a poor emotional state, you can experience headaches, upset stomach, back pain, chest pain, high blood pressure, or even constipation? Now, the point is, you don't want to experience any of these things, right? Generally, you want to retain a positive outlook on life. But when you can't do that, it might cascade into a series of issues. So maybe you become more pessimistic or grumpy, and you might treat people around you worse. And as I just said, you can literally get constipation. Now, clearly though, sometimes it's hard to avoid those feelings. And I, like all of you, have felt sensitive before. Especially in elementary school, I used to cry all the time. I remember the first time I forgot a homework assignment, I cried. It was devastating. And another time in elementary school, some kid basically flooded the toilet somehow. I think they stuffed a bunch of paper towels in and pushed down repeatedly in the handle. And the teachers were trying to figure out who caused this. So when my teacher asked me, like not even accusing me, she was just like, hey, did you do this? And I cried. And I didn't do it. So the mere thought that someone would question my character was enough to make me burst into tears. As I said, it was a pretty big problem. Alright, sorry. But gradually I was able to build thicker skin. You know, I don't cry anymore when I forget a homework assignment. And during this period of time, I basically created a process, like subconsciously in my head, that I used to help myself cope. Now on screen are going to be these steps, but it basically boils down to, is the statement true? Can I change it? And how can I change it? And every time I felt down about something, I would just ask myself these questions. And if at any point my answer was no, then I would just tell myself to accept it as a reality. So to dive into more detail about what exactly these mean, first question is the statement true? So if you feel offended by something, you would ask yourself this, and ask yourself, is the statement true? And ask yourself realistically, because no one likes to accept an insult as truth, right? But it's a necessary process for us to basically grow as people. Think about it this way, if you rejected every flaw someone pointed out on you, then you'd be exactly the same as you were in the 4th grade. Basically, you ask yourself this, and if your answer is yes, then you would continue down the process. But if it's no, then figure out why the person's saying that in the first place. So are you just being unaware of something, or is maybe the person just joking? Figuring out the why will give you a much better handle on how to resolve the situation. If the person believes that you have a character flaw that you know you don't, then maybe you can talk to them and figure out why they think that way, or maybe figure out how you can fix it. But to move along, assuming the statement is true, then you would ask yourself the next question, which is, can I change it? Asking yourself this, if it's false, then, as I said before, it might just be a reality or a fact that you have to learn to accept. However, most of the time that won't be the case. And if you ask yourself this, it's more so just a confirmation step. Because after all, you can't really do anything if you can't change the situation in any way. And it might be unnecessary for you to even adjust yourself in the first place. So if you ask yourself this, and your answer is yes, I can, then you ask yourself the last question, which is how can I change it? And by answering this, you're actually creating a definitive instruction that you can follow in order to make the necessary improvement to yourself. And that's the entire process. It's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory in my opinion, but just by following this, it's effectively allowing you to identify flaws within yourself and then make the necessary action to change it. So, as an example, let's say that someone says that you talk all the time and you get pretty offended through them saying this. Now, we would follow the steps. So, step one would be ask yourself if the statement is true. So, for the sake of the talk, let's say that, yeah, it's true and I talk all the time and no one can shut me up. Then you would basically move to the next one and ask, can I change it? Yeah, I can definitely control how often I'm conversating with other people. So for the final step, you ask yourself, how can I change it? Well, maybe I can regulate, the amount I talk and not blurt out whatever comes to my mind, or refrain from doing so at inappropriate times. And then, just like that, I'm able to effectively identify an annoying habit of mine and then make the necessary change. Now, basically, in general, people like to avoid conflict and they like to, hold grudges or talk behind each other's backs. And I think that is a doomed tactic. I think it's doomed to fail. Because after all, how can someone change something if they don't even know about it in the first place, right? That's what my advice is. If you are on the other end and have something you want someone else to know, then express it directly and, tell them outright. And especially because working together to resolve a misunderstanding is one of the most surefire ways to essentially repair a relationship. Now, another thing is bullying. If someone is just constantly insulting you and just outright bullying you, then that's a whole different issue, right? Bullying is not the same thing as just feeling insulted once. If that's the case, you either need to, tell them to stop, maybe get a teacher involved or something. Because when you feel insulted, it should not happen often. And when it does, then you should be able to apply the process that I just went over in order to resolve it. Now, by embracing something that you originally found repulsive and listening to it, you're effectively calming down and, looking at it from an objective perspective. And being able to do that not only demonstrates the emotional maturity, but, as I said, it was crucial to this process in the first place. And in order to, my hope is that everyone can stop being really hostile all the time or get easily into fights with one another and learn to basically maintain a positive attitude and get along. And I hope that my talk has helped cultivate that in some way. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Up next, we have Arella Yang.